First, thanks so much. I'm in my 33rd year at UT, and this place means the world to me. And I'm so grateful that you're here and engaging with UT, because it's so meaningful. And I'm also very happy that Rex Tillerson and Chris Plonsky talked about integrity, because that's really important to me too, and it's what I want to talk about. So let me just also start with a shameless plug. With the help of some good people, including the Bates Family Foundation. Janet Bates is here, and Janet, where are you, my buddy? Oh. I'm having trouble spotting Janet. At any rate, we did a bunch of ethics videos, and they're on YouTube. They're on our website, ethicsunwrapped.utexas.edu. They're free. Anybody can use them. They're aimed at anybody in the world who's interested in learning about ethics or teaching ethics. And if anything at all I say today strikes a chord with you, you ought to check them out, because your company could use them, your family could use them, your kids could use them, anybody could use them. So here we go. Think about ethical issues out there. Extramarital sex, insider trading, padding your expense account, taking home a few little items for work. There's Janet Bates. Janet waved, everybody. I talked about the Bates Family Foundation. So, true-false question. This is audience participation time. I have solid, well-considered ethical beliefs that can be changed only by reasoned arguments or new evidence. How many of you think that's true for you? Good, good. How many think not? Some are abstaining. I didn't get anybody thinking not. Quite a few people thinking yes. How about this one? I have character and integrity that will carry me through difficult situations and hard choices. How many think that? Hands up in the air. Great. How many say, oh, me, not so much? Okay, all right. This is good. We're off to a good start. So I got some good news for you, and I got some bad news for you. The good news is you are not nearly as unethical as you could be. Show of hands again. How many of you stole candy from a baby this week? Only one? Okay. And how many of you took the opportunity to mug a little old lady? Nobody. Good. Okay, I'm feeling safer already. Here's the good news, I think. Every one of us has opportunities every day to lie, cheat, steal, take candy from little babies, mug little old ladies, and almost never do we do those things. And so that's a good thing. I'm very happy about that. Here's the bad news. You're not as ethical as you think you are. You're par for the course. They do surveys of Americans. 92% of Americans will say, I am satisfied with my ethical integrity. I am just where I need to be. And I'm here to tell you, you're not where you need to be. I'm here to tell you we're all Lance Armstrong. Sort of. Here's the other tough thing about this talk. Nobody wants to hear it. But we all lie a little bit and cheat a little bit when it helps us. We don't lie as much as Lance Armstrong, or as big as Lance Armstrong, or as publicly as Lance Armstrong, but almost every one of us screws up in ways that we really at some point kind of wish we probably hadn't screwed up. And it can get us in trouble, and that's what we have to be careful about. So when I talk about ethics, my word of the day, for me as much as for you, is humility. It pays to be humble. Because when you read in the newspaper about the latest white-collar criminal from Enron or Arthur Anderson or WorldCom or all the Wall Street banks who are doing the perp walk, if I'd asked them those questions, they'd have said the same thing. I've got my firm beliefs, I've got my character, it's not going to happen to me, but it happened to them. Why? A couple reasons. If any of you have ever seen me give a talk on ethics, you've probably seen this little demonstration, because I like it so much. Let me see if I can pull this up. So I got a guy on the screen here, coming up, that's him on the right there. I want you to look at what he says, look at his lips very carefully, and tell me what you think he's saying when I turn this on.
Ba, 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 ba.
Okay, look carefully. One more time. Oh.
Ba, 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 ba.
Dick, what do you think he said?
Couldn't understand a word he said.
No idea?
No idea.
Barry? Bernie? Adam? Nope, not a clue. Mike? Nope. Oh, well, okay, well, try it this way. And what do you think's going on there anyway? I don't know what that's about.
Horror film.
Okay, now do me a favor. Close your eyes and listen.
Ba, 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 ba.
That wasn't much better, was it? Could you hear it though? Ba 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 ba. Okay, so here's what's going on with what's called the McGurk effect. His mouth is making the sounding or shaping ga 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 ga. That's what he's really saying. But they tape him saying ba 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 ba, and that's what they pipe in. So that's what we hear. So our brain is getting conflicting signals. Our ears are hearing one thing, our eyes are seeing a different thing, and when it goes into our brain just makes it up. Some people hear da da, some people hear they're not sure, most people say, I don't know what the guy's saying. But that is our brain fooling us, which our brain has a habit of doing. So let me go back to my little slides here. That's what I would call an auditory illusion. And if you go on YouTube and click on auditory illusions, you can find whole bunches of them. But there are, of course, also optical illusions. And you've all seen this one. Look at the white, you see a candlestick or a lamp. Look at the black, you see two faces looking at each other. And of course, there's this classic one, which is either an old crone or a beautiful young woman, depending on how you look at it. There are even tactile illusions. I pulled this one on my wife the other day, had her stand there with her hands out, and then I just tapped them with her eyes closed. Hands out, eyes closed. And I tapped them as closely as I could, one then the other, one then the other, one then the other, back and forth, and had her tell me which one of those, which hand did I touch first. And she got it right virtually 100% of the time, even with her eyes closed. She's amazing. But then I just had her do this. Cross your arms, close your eyes, and now let me tap them. And her accuracy weight plummeted, and she had to really think about every time. So the bottom line is there are situations where our brain fools our eyes, fools our ears, fools even our tactile sense, and it can also fool our moral sense. And so the message I've got here today is the actual answer to that is false. And the actual answer to that one is false. And I want to spend some time telling you about it. If there's one overwhelming finding in behavioral ethics research over the past decade, it is this. One, most people want to think of themselves as good people. In fact, most people need to think of themselves as good people. As a business ethics person, it is critical for me to think of myself as a good person, and I do. I was born in Kansas. I was raised on a farm. My mom dragged me to church every Sunday. I had great teachers. No reason I should not be a good person. At the same time, all the evidence shows that most people frequently act unethically, usually in minor ways. We don't go murder people. We don't go rob banks. But when we can fudge a little bit to help ourselves out, we often do it. Frequently, completely unconsciously. It's not like we're saying, oh, I'm going to be a bad guy today. I'm going to break the rules. But our brain fools us. So in the New York Times last week, I just noticed this quotation in an article. So I threw it up here because it supports what I'm telling you. Research shows that ordinary human beings lie a lot, multiple times a day, even when there's no clear benefit lying. Generally, humans lie about relatively minor things. I lost your phone number, so I didn't call, blah, 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 blah. But humans can also be persuaded to lie about far more important matters, especially if the lie will enhance or protect their reputation or standing in the group. I'll talk about some examples of that in a little bit, but sometimes our brain is telling us we so much want to accomplish these goals that allows us to lie. And if you sit there wondering, okay, how can I be doing all this scuzzy stuff all the time, but still know in my heart I'm such a good person? Well, you've got an accomplice in all that, and it's your brain. It can fool your eyes, it can fool your ears, it can fool your tactile sense, and it can fool your moral sense. And so I want to talk a little bit about those moral beliefs and attitudes that seem to us, seem to me, seem to you, seem to everybody to be so concrete, that can only be changed by reasoned arguments and new evidence. Think about your self-interest. It affects what you think is ethical and not ethical, and again, in ways oftentimes you won't even notice it. It feels to us as if we have these firmly based beliefs, but it's not really the case. If I were to ask you, what do you think about the ethicality of this or that or the other, and you told me, and a week later your kid comes out of the closet, I promise you, your view on the ethics of homosexuality might well change. If your daughter turns up pregnant in high school, your views as to the ethicality of premarital sex might just change a little bit. I'm just saying, it just appears to me that Democrats' views on the morality of the way we treat people in Guantanamo softened quite a bit once Obama took office. Republicans' views on the morality of leaving it to future generations to pay our national debt hardened quite a bit when Obama took office. That's our self-interest affecting our judgments in ways we don't even notice. I'll talk about self-interest some more later, but let me talk quickly about emotional reactions, because this is the other thing. We tend to think, it feels to us, like the ethical views that we have are all based on logic and facts, philosophy courses we took, and that sort of thing. But the fact is, a huge percentage of our ethical feelings and judgments are emotionally based. They've got very little to do with logic and reaction. If, for example, I were to put up on the screen here just a little scale, ethical, 1, unethical, 10, and I asked you to read a bunch of descriptions to you. Joe did this, Fred did this, Sam did this, Sally did this, and ask you to rate the ethicality of them. Asked everybody in the room to do this. I would get different answers if the room were just a little dirtier or the lighting were a little less, because that affects our emotions and that affects our judgments. Psychologists have shown if I just do something like put a dirty Kleenex next to you, you'll make a different judgment. You'll be harsher on somebody who's described as having done something. Because, again, our ethical judgments are emotion-based to a large extent. And so if I do something to trigger the disgust emotion by just putting a dirty Kleenex next to you, you'll make a different judgment than you would otherwise. And you may be sitting there saying, oh, come on, that can't be right. Oh, come on, that would not happen to me. But psychologists run these studies over and over and over again, and it happens to almost everybody. Not necessarily all the time, but almost everybody. Okay, audience participation again. Frank is on a footbridge over the trolley tracks. You may have heard about this one. This has been in the newspapers some lately as a hypothetical. So there's Frank, the guy with the question mark over his head. There's the trolley. It's coming this way. He knows trolleys and can see that the one approaching the bridge is out of control with his conductor passed out. Ah, terrible situation. On the track under the bridge, there are 5 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The banks are so steep, the banks are not pictured, but they're there, that they can't get off the track in time. Frank knows that the only way to stop an out-of-control trolley is to drop a very heavy weight into its path, but the only available sufficiently heavy weight is a large person, this poor sap right here, also watching the trolley from the footbridge. Now, Frank himself is a little guy. He's not big enough to stop the trolley, but he knows that if he pushes the big guy off in front of the trolley, it'll stop the trolley. It will kill the big guy, but it will save the 5 lives. And so the question is it moral for Frank to push the big guy off of the bridge in front of the trolley to stop it and kill the 5 lives? Audience participation, how many say yes? How many say no? Really interesting. Okay, that's good. Around the world, if you ask people this in virtually every culture, normally somewhere between 10 and 15% will say they think it's ethical. And 85% like you say it's not. My students normally 8 to 10% say it's ethical, the rest not. But here again is the interesting thing. Psychologists have run this study after showing people a funny skit from Saturday Night Live. And when people have been shown a funny skit from Saturday Night Live, and they're just kind of feeling a little happy, and their emotional state has been changed, 3 times as many people say it's ethical to push the guy off the track. They don't realize that's going to happen. They don't realize that's why they're doing it, but it changes people's judgments. Part of this has to do with the role we're playing as we make decisions and the viewpoint that we're taking is something called role morality. And so, again, audience participation. ABC companies' most profitable drug, its internal studies indicate, causes 14 to 22 unnecessary deaths a year. Its competitors have drugs that cost the same, have the same beneficial effects, but don't cause those deaths. If regulators knew of the internal study, they would ban the sale of the drug, but they don't. And so the question is, under these circumstances, is it ethical for ABC to keep selling their drug? How many would say yes? Nobody saying yes. I got a couple hands. I got a couple hands say yes, it is. When psychologists did this, in about the same percentages as here, 97% said unethical, 3% said ethical. Then they brought in another group of people and just said, hey, you're on the board of directors of ABC, and here's the problem that you face. What are you going to do? Well, now they're not judging the ethicality of the action per se. Now they're thinking about maximizing shareholder value. Now they're thinking about duties to the shareholders. Now they're thinking about our company having to lay people off, and all of a sudden, 80% say ABC should continue to sell the drug and should take legal and political action to stop regulators if regulators try to stop them from doing it. Look at it from one perspective, almost everybody can see that's unethical. But when you're in the middle of it, and you're thinking about other considerations other than just what's ethical and what's not, you make a different judgment. That's role morality. And we don't realize how it affects us when we play different roles in society, and we make certain decisions as people in certain contexts, and other people who weren't in the position we were in look at us and say, what in the world were you thinking? Are you out of your mind? Evolution has really conditioned us to treat in-groups favorably and members of the out-group unfavorably. And the impact is large. And so the bottom line is what that means. We, again, feel that we've got these strict standards. Here's my morality. Here's what I believe is right. Here's what I believe is wrong. But if we're judging people who are like us, same age, same religion, same political party, they're Texans, they're Longhorns, we make different judgments than if they're Okies or Aggies or other outgroups. And again, we don't even realize it. Interesting study that was done. I like this one. So they bring a guy in, and they say, so I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and then I got some little tasks that need to be done. Got another guy in the room next door. He's going to do one of the tasks. You're going to do one of them. But let's start with just a quick question. How tall do you think the Empire State Building is? Another guy puts out a number. And the psychologist said, great, okay, I'm going to write that down. Okay, that's cool. And now to move on to the second thing, we've got these two problems. And the other guy got here first, and we gave it, the tough one to him because it takes longer. And he's over in the room next door. His name's Frank. And so we're going to give you the easy one. And when you're done, if you want to help Frank, you can. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. You can leave. So this guy doesn't know Frank at all. He doesn't get any reward or benefit from helping Frank. And so usually when he's done with his task, he just leaves. Only 16% of the time does he stay and help Frank. But in the other iteration of the experiment, they bring people in, ask them the Empire State Building question, and then tell them, oh, you know what? It's not that tall. You overestimated the height of the Empire State Building. The guy we got in the next room doing the other problem, Frank, he overestimated it too. You're both overestimators. And that was enough of a common bond for 58% of the people to help Frank. Not because he's another Longhorn or another Republican or another Catholic or whatever. We're both overestimators of the height of the Empire State Building. That puts enough stuff in common that I want to help that guy when I wouldn't otherwise. And so when we judge other people's ethical actions, that's how much our judgment can be affected in ways we don't even understand. Just one more example I'll give you. A study was published in Nature magazine fairly recently. They gave people on a computer screen a list of questions. Again, rate the ethicality or unethicality of this action, that action, this action, that action. Describe them, and the people give the answers. And then the psychologist says, oh, hey, let me print this out and we'll talk about it. So he hits a button and print it out. But he had the computer rigged so that on the questions, every now and again, it took out a knot. And every now and again, it put in a knot. So that several of the answers were changed 180 degrees. And then he talked about those answers with the people. And 68% of the time, they didn't even notice that their position had been switched. And when they were asked about them, large percentages of them argued like wildcats. for this position that was exactly the opposite of the one that they had answered. I could go on for a long time on this point, but what I want to say is, the bottom line is your moral views are probably not as fixed as you think. It feels to us like they're fixed, but they're not. And so part of that, what that means is a little humility. When you're judging other people and their actions, be a little humble and realize that if you were just looking at it a different way, or if they were in a different group, or you had a different relationship with them, you might be making completely different judgments. Now, the scary thing really is this also affects our actions, our moral actions. Again, most of us feel like we have rock-solid character that leads us to act morally. And again, I'm right there with you. That's exactly what it feels like to me. And a big chunk of my brain will never be convinced that's not true. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, a big chunk of my brain will never not believe that. But the evidence is fairly overwhelming. We could just go back to the self-serving bias. Did a lab study with something called the dictatorship game. The dictator game is just this interesting little thing. You just bring in two people, Dale and Bernie, and you just say, okay, here's the deal. We're going to flip a coin. Okay, Dick, you're the dictator. Here's $10. You can give some to Bernie or you can not. It's up to you. And that's pretty much it. He either gives some to Bernie, he doesn't, and then we're done. He can keep it all. Economists think, a rational person just take the $10 and put it in their pocket and walk out the door. But most people don't do that. And when you ask people, when you describe this to them and say, hey, what would be ethical? What would you do in this setting if you were given the $10 and you were the dictator? Most people say, I'd give the other guy $3 or $4. I didn't do anything to earn it. It would seem fair for me to give the other guy $3 or $4. So cool. So a month later, they bring those same people back and they give them the $10. Now what are they going to do? Well, most of them give the other guy some money, but not nearly as much as they said would be fair, not nearly as much as they thought they would. Once they've got the power and they can put the money in their pocket, they put more of it in their pocket. And this plays out in the real world. Finance professors and accounting professors do all sorts of studies, and you will not be surprised to learn that when CEOs and CFOs have a lot of money at stake in terms of end-of-year bonuses and that sort of thing, they are much more likely to fudge the numbers, to engage in earnings management, to engage in securities fraud, than they are if they don't have that much money at stake. No surprise there. But again, what I want to stress is, oftentimes we don't even notice that's happening. We don't notice how this is affecting us. And so studies have been done regarding physicians, attorneys, auditors, et cetera, on down the line. All of us do this. So a friend of mine gave a talk last year, and I think it was at this conference. So some of you may have heard it. And he talked about some studies regarding conflicts of interest of physicians and how they can be affected. And he got a scorching email the next day from a doctor who hadn't even been here, but had heard about it from somebody else. And he said, I can't believe that you're spreading this scurrilous urban rumor or urban myth about physicians. We would never make a judgment that benefited us and cost a patient anything. We would never do that. It's ridiculous. Except that. There are like 400 studies that show that physicians do that, along with everybody else. So for example, they brought in a bunch of physicians. And they said, you know how drug companies are always kind of giving you guys some swag? And they're sending you off to ski trips because there's a big conference in Aspen, or they're sending you to Jamaica because there's a conference in Jamaica. Does that ever affect how other physicians might prescribe drugs? And 61% of the doctors said, that's pretty cool stuff to get all that stuff. Yeah, that probably does affect the judgment of other physicians. Then they brought in another group of physicians, described the same scenario to them, and said, does that ever affect how you prescribe drugs for your patients? 16% admitted that it might. 84% said not a chance. If there's one thing that's clear is we can all, when we read the newspapers, see how conflicts of interest affect other people and their judgment, but we have this huge difficulty in seeing how it affects us. There's study after study after study after study that shows if a physician gets a financial interest in a lab that does x-rays or CAT scans or whatever, the percentage of his patients who all of a sudden need CAT scans or x-rays goes up by a factor of 2, 4, 6, 8. A recent study I saw was 12. They are not consciously subordinating the interests of their patients to their own financial interest in the vast majority of the cases. But unconsciously, this stuff affects us. And that's why we need to be humble, and we need to keep that in mind. Obedience to authority. We are all raised to please our parents, our teachers, policemen, other people of authority. In fact, the little pleasure centers of our brains light up when we do that. And that's all good, but it can get us in trouble. Stanley Milgram, I'm certain you've heard about this study, was wondering, there was a theory out that the reason normal Germans became a part of Hitler's death machine was that Germans are particularly susceptible to being obedient to authority. And a lot of people said that could never happen in America because we're not that kind of people. So Milgram said, well, let me do a study. And you probably heard about this. He's got an experimenter, a psychologist, who brings a couple people in and he explains to them, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to study the effects of negative reinforcement on learning. One of you is going to be a teacher, one of you is going to be the learner, and I'm going to ask some questions and we'll administer some electric shocks and we'll see if it improves your performance. And we'll flip a coin to see who's who, and he flips the coin. And so one guy is chosen to answer the questions. He's hooked up to this electric-looking machine, and then we kind of pull a curtain, and he's actually a Confederate. He's the assistant of the experimenter. The true subject of the experiment is this guy who's supposed to run the machine, which again, all these electric dials and stuff, and a control panel that goes from slight shock, moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, danger, severe shock, and triple X, it's so bad we can't even put a name on it. And so, the way the experiment is supposed to work is this guy asks this guy a question, he misses it, he tells the subject, oh, he missed the question, administer the shock. Subject pushes a button, bzzzt. Guy behind the counter goes, oh, or behind the curtain goes, oh, hurts. He misses the next question. We turn the dial up a little bit, push the button, he pushes the button, the guy behind the curtain goes, ow! And up it goes. And pretty soon the guy behind the curtain is saying, please stop, I don't want to do this anymore, let me go, you're killing me. And the guy at the counter, our subject, is saying, I think we ought to stop. He's protesting, and this guy's saying, the experiment must go on. The experiment must go on. After a while, this guy is screaming and crying. After a while, we don't hear from him. It's like he's passed out. But no response is the wrong answer. And so this guy says, push the button. So having described that, before he did it, Milgram asked people, okay, what percentages of Americans would keep pushing that button? Just because some guy in a white lab coat they never met before in their lives, who has absolutely no power or authority over them, is not giving them a dime, how many people would do that just to please some guy in a position of authority? Adam, what do you think? Percentage guess. 10, 15%? When Milgram did the study, most people said 1%, maybe. 1% of Americans might be psychopaths, they might do it. They asked trained psychologists, they said, oh, 1%, way too high. 1 in 10,000 Americans might do that. But then he ran the experiment. 100% of his subjects went all the way up into this range. 65% topped it out. Still administering a shock to somebody they thought had passed out. Now, they don't want to do this. They're sitting there going, he wants to stop. They're sweating and their eyes are darting around. They don't want to do it. But some guy in a white lab coat with no power over them at all tells them the experiment must continue, and they keep doing it. And so you've got to ask yourself, if we are that prone to be obedient to authority, think about a situation where you've got a boss who you like and respect and really does have power and authority over you. When they push you to do something they think is right, how hard is it to exercise your own independent ethical judgment and not do it? I've talked to several white-collar criminals in high-profile cases who said, I screwed up because I was so focused on pleasing my boss, I didn't even think about anything else. And only when the FBI came in and put my boss in handcuffs and marched him out the door did the scales kind of fall from my eyes, and I realized, I think I screwed up here. There's also conformity bias. You know, I grew up on a farm. And on the farm, you really only need one fork at dinner. And the first time I was in a fancy restaurant and there was more than one fork, I really was kind of bumfoozled. I didn't quite know what to do, so I did the smart thing. I watched and waited to see what everybody else does. And normally that's a good, evolutionarily speaking, tactic. Take your cues from other people. The problem is we can take it too far. So think about this situation. Who am I going to pick on? I'm going to pick on Claudia. Claudia, this is Solomon Asch. He's also studying the Holocaust and how it happened. And I've got 3 lines on the card on the right and 1 line on the card on the left. Tell me, Claudia, which line on the left is, which line, A, B, or C, is the same length as this line?
C.
C. Everybody on board with that? Anybody want to argue with that? Everybody thinks C? Good. So, everybody gets this one right, unless you do the experiment the way Asch did. He brought Claudia in with 6 other people who were all his Confederates. And the first one said A. Second one said A. Third one said A. Fourth one said A. Fifth one said A. Sixth one said A. Now we ask Claudia. And 75% of the time, people gave obviously wrong answers. Just because everybody else did it, it must be right. Thinking, what do they know that I don't know? Their eyes are darting around. You can tell by their body language. They know this isn't right, but they say it anyway.
But I graduated from Texas, so I always have to.
All right. That is what we want to hear. Again, total strangers, think how hard it is to exercise your own independent ethical judgment when the other people, all pushing in one direction, are not total strangers, but your coworkers, who you like and respect and need to get along with. And it's not a black and white thing, it is an ethical issue that does have shades of gray. How hard is it to exercise your own independent judgment and not cave in to what everybody else wants to do? It's hard. And if you end up in a wrong organization, like an Enron, you can end up running off the cliff just like everybody else. Time pressure. I love this study. You've probably read about this one. This has actually been in the newspapers recently too. So we've got some fresh-faced young seminary students. These are good kids. And they're told, you know, there's a parent group on campus, on the other side of campus, and we need somebody to run over and give them a little talk on the Good Samaritan. Would you do that? Sure. So these these little seminary students, one at a time, as they run this experiment, walk across campus to give this talk on the Good Samaritan. As it happens, as they're walking along the sidewalk, there's a guy lying by the sidewalk, moaning and groaning, "Oh, help, somebody help me. He clearly needs a Good Samaritan." If they're not in a hurry, almost all of them stop and help him. That's good. But if they're running a little bit late, if they're told the talk is in about 5 minutes, and they know they're running a little bit late, they're in a hurry, only 63% stop. And if they're specifically told, "Oh man, you're late, you better get over there in a hurry," they're urged to hurry up, only 10% stopped. Look how their moral actions changed just based on time pressure. No chance in the world they realized this was affecting them, but it affects all of us. When you are at work and you're up against a deadline and your boss is pushing you, that's one of the situations where you are most liable to cut ethical corners and maybe not even realize that you're doing it. Self-control depletion. This is one of my favorites. Okay, so that's me. That apple could sit on my desk for a month and it would just rot there. I would never eat it. But that's gone in about 4 seconds because I got no self-control where dessert comes in. So here's the experiment they did. They drew up a series of kind of little math puzzles. Not too sophisticated, but not that easy. 20 puzzles, bring in a whole bunch of people, and have them all do the puzzles. How many can you get right in 20 minutes? And then they graded them and found out on average they got about 9 right. Cool, good. Okay, now we know the baseline. So now we bring in another group of people, and we have them do the puzzles. And then we ask them, they're getting a reward for each one they got right, and we ask them to grade their own, go drop their sheet in a shredder so they can't be checked, and then report how they did. And all of a sudden, that average of 9 jumped to 11. Not because 2 or 3 people said, "Oh, I got all 20 right," because nobody can tell themselves they're still an ethical person and claim they got 20 right. But a lot of people could say, "Oh, I almost got that one. And just a little more time and I would have gotten that one." And 9 became 11. when they self-reported. Now, they've done tons of iterations of this study, all of which are interesting, but the one I liked the most was, before they give them the 20 questions, they give them a puzzle to work that's really pretty much insoluble. And they spend 20 minutes trying to get that right, and they can't get it. And they say, okay, no problem, we got these other 20 for you. Let us know, take those. So they take those, and then they go self-report. And all of a sudden, the 9 has gone to 11, has gone to 16. It takes self-control not to cheat. When you can put something in your pocket if you do cheat. It takes self-control. If you have depleted your self-control, we all have just a limited amount of it, it's easy for us to cheat. And so the bottom line here is, when you're working really hard, when you're stressed out other stuff in your life, when you think your company is treating you unfairly, all that takes self-control to deal with. And when your self-control is depleted, you are very much at risk of doing things that later you're going to regret. And again, our emotions play a role and we don't even know. So they just, for the heck of it, ran it one more time after showing these people a clip from Saturday Night Live, funny clip, put them in a good mood. Cheating went up. Why did cheating go up? Well, they're just in a good mood. They got a lot of stuff, good stuff going on. They're just not worried about the guilt that they would normally, not as much worried about the guilt as they would normally be worried about. So the cheating went up. This is maybe my favorite experiment. Oh, that's what I'm looking for, my Diet Coke. So they put a self-service coffee machine in an office building and left it there for several months. It's on the honor system. You come in, you get a cup of coffee, you drop $1 in the cup, and away you go. They just want to kind of get a baseline, how much cheating goes on in that setting. Most people pay for their coffee. Vast majority of people pay for the coffee, but there's a level of cheating that goes on. Some people they just don't. I forgot the $1 or whatever, and it's easy to rationalize. So then, having gotten that baseline established, they did a bunch of funky stuff. They increased the lighting. They made it lighter in the room. Cheating went down. Because then you feel like a little more like you're being watched, like you might be seen. So cheating went down. They put a mirror next to the coffee machine. Cheating went down. People felt like they were being watched, even if only by themselves, and they didn't cheat as much. If they just taped a drawing of 2 eyes on the wall, cheating went down. And my favorite one, this is really the good one. If they told people, somebody said the coffee room's haunted, cheating went down. Even people who didn't believe in ghosts felt like they were kind of being more watched than otherwise. Now again, none of this is happening at the conscious level. It's all happening unconsciously, but all this stuff affects how honest we are from day to day in ways we don't even understand. If we wanted cheating to go up, we'd just make the room a little bit messier, turn the lighting down, and cheating would go up, I promise you. Role morality, I mentioned this before. Again, it's the way you're looking at things. Famous story, Space Shuttle Challenger about to go up. Morton Thiokol engineers say, we've never launched when it's this cold. We're a little worried about the O-rings when we launch and it's this cold. Probably shouldn't launch. Their supervisor came in and said, hey, put on your manager's hats. And when they stopped looking at it as engineers, thinking about safety, and started looking at it as managers, thinking about dollars and cents, they changed their mind and said, oh, okay, we can launch, and we know what happened. So the bottom line is that our moral actions are greatly affected by context, the situation we're in, stuff going on in our brain that we might not even be aware of. So experts in the field like DeSteno and Valdesolo say morality, contrary to popular belief, can't be controlled simply by strength of will and reason. It's great to go to church, and it is great to hear all the ethics, all the character lessons that you get there and in the Scouts and everywhere else. That cannot hurt. That has got to be a good thing. But it's not enough if you don't guard against these other factors that can affect your judgment no matter how strong your character is. Think about the white-collar criminals who go marched off to jail. What do all their neighbors say when they're interviewed? Great guy, loved his family, went to church every Sunday. They're always described as the kind of person that we want to be, that we think we are, and yet they went off the rails. Dan Ariely, you might have seen some of his TED Talks, said people tend to cheat up to the level that allows us to retain our self-image as reasonably honest individuals. We don't rob banks, we don't do terrible stuff, because then even our mind, our brain, couldn't fool us into thinking we're good people. But we're able to cheat a little bit and get away with it Moldenau, in a recent book, said, the truth is, from criminals to greedy executives to the nasty guy down the street, people who act in ways we abhor are usually convinced that they're right. Lance Armstrong told Oprah 2 weeks ago. Didn't seem wrong at the time. Talk to white-collar criminals who have been convicted, people who fit your demographic, your age, your education, your level of company. They'll almost all tell you, I just didn't see what I was doing wrong at the time. Most of them can see it in hindsight, but at the time they couldn't see it. And it's because their brain fools them. Max Baseman, Harvard, and Ken Brunzel, Notre Dame, wrote a book called Blind Spots, which I think I put on the list. Basically said that when you want something bad enough, when there's self-interest involved or some of these other factors, your mind will just hide the ethical issue from you and you won't see it. They did a study recently, I love this. So lots of college kids are interested in the child labor cause. I'm all for that. So you got lots of college kids saying, Nike, we're mad at you, UT Apparel, we're mad at you because your stuff is being made overseas where child labor is being used. But what they found out if they ran a study was if you show college girls a really cute outfit that they'd look really good in, and they find out it was made by child labor, all of a sudden their views as to how unethical child labor is shift. Now all of a sudden it's not quite as bad as it was before. And part of this is because we're so darn good at rationalizations. If you hear yourself saying stuff like, everybody does it, if I don't do it, somebody else will, my boss told me to do it, I work lots of overtime, so it's okay if I take a few things home from work. If you hear yourself saying stuff like that, a little alarm should go off in your head, ding, 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 and you should say, maybe I better police myself. Because if you don't monitor yourself, well, nobody can monitor you as well as you can monitor you. I just want to give one more example here, and then I'm going to stop because I'm out of time. This is how good we are at rationalizing. Psychologists wanted to know, how is it that Eliot Spitzer can be Attorney General of New York prosecuting Johns for visiting prostitutes while he is visiting prostitutes? How is it that Rush Limbaugh can be on the radio railing against drug addicts while he is addicted to OxyContin? How can we be so hypocritical? And the answer is, we're just so darn good at rationalizations. So, think about this. Bring a guy in, well, I'll describe this. I'll pick on Keith. So here's the deal. Keith comes in, and I say, Keith, we got 2 tasks that need to be done today. You're the first one here. The other guy must be running a little bit late. So since you're here first, I'll let you decide who gets which task. And I'll just tell you, one of them's pretty easy, won't take very long. Yeah, it's kind of a crappy task. It's going to take a while. It's going to be a pain in the ass. And you can decide who gets which task. And if you choose to, here's a coin. You can flip a coin and decide who gets which task. And so what if Keith then says, I'm not flipping the coin, I'm taking the easy task. The other guy could have the crappy task. How many of you would say Keith acted a little unethically there? Well, that wasn't the response I was hoping for. You all like Keith too much. You're giving him a break. Most people, when asked, at least in this experiment, said, that's a little scuzzy. I wouldn't be proud of that. That's not exactly exemplary behavior. So then they actually brought Keith in, explained that to him, and 90% of the time, Keith doesn't flip the coin, gives the other guy the crappy task. And then 10 minutes later, they asked Keith about it. You came in, you could have flipped the coin, but you didn't. You just gave the other guy the bad task. Do you feel bad about that at all? And the answer was almost always, well, no, I was the first one here. It's okay for me to assign it. He would have come. He probably wouldn't have flipped the coin either. It's okay. I don't feel bad about it at all. Then they did one more version, where right after Keith decides, no, I'm not going to flip the coin. I'm going to give the task to the other guy. They said, keep these numbers in your head. 83762. I'm going to be back in 10 minutes. 83762. So they leave. They come back in 10 minutes. Keith, what was that number? 83762, he got it. Now they say, oh, and 10 minutes ago, you gave the other guy the crappy task and you didn't even flip the coin. How do you feel about that? And most of the time, people will say, well, I guess that wasn't like the best thing I ever did. It's a little scuzzy. I feel a little bad that I did that. And the deal is, when Keith has to keep that number in his mind for 10 minutes, his mind can't rationalize. that cognitive part of his brain can't come up with reasons why it was perfectly okay for him to act in a way that most people, not this room, but most people thought was scuzzy. So I've got a few more slides there, but I am out of time, so I'm going to stop, and I'm just going to say that if you want to be a good person, and I think we all do, realize it's impossible to be perfect, and realize you've got a lot of forces kind of working against you. But these things I'm talking about, they're explanations for why people screw up, but they're not excuses for why people screw up. No judge says, oh, well, hey, your self-control was depleted, so, you know, I'm not going to send you off to jail. It was a chocolate cake. What are you going to do? Exactly. And so you have got to be aware of these factors. You have got to monitor yourself, especially for rationalizations. You've got to try to look at things from different ways so that you don't mess up. And I could talk more about it, but I'm out of time, so I'll let you go. Thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it a lot.